You have been operating without the manual your entire life. Not the manual for external success, the manual for human nature itself. The specific set of observations about how people actually behave beneath the surface of what they say, what they pretend, what the culture trains them to display. This manual exists. It has been compiled, tested, and refined across thousands of years of philosophy, psychology, and statecraft. Most men never read it. They navigate human interactions on intuition, improvisation, and the slow accumulation of lessons they could have had in advance if anyone had taught them. You are one of those men, and the cost has been higher than you realize. Schopenhauer understood that the failure to grasp human nature is the single largest source of unnecessary suffering in a man's life. Not because human nature is evil, because human nature is specific. It operates by particular principles that produce predictable outcomes. And the man who does not understand those principles is continuously surprised, repeatedly manipulated, and systematically disadvantaged by people who do understand them. The world does not punish ignorance of these laws openly. It punishes quietly, continuously, and through consequences the man cannot always trace back to their cause. What follows are 6 hidden laws of human nature you should have learned by 30. Each of them governs a specific dynamic operating around you right now. Each of them explains behavior patterns you have observed but been unable to name. And each of them carries a price for the man who reaches middle adulthood without integrating them into his operational understanding of reality. You have been paying that price for years. The only question is whether you will finally stop. Hidden law number 1. People reveal themselves most accurately in the small details, not the grand statements. The grand statements are always curated. When a man or woman tells you directly who they are, what they value, what they will or will not do, you are receiving the version of themselves they have prepared for external presentation. This version is not necessarily false. It is simply not where the actual information lives. The actual information lives in the small behaviors that occur when the person is not consciously managing their presentation. The micro reactions, the casual treatment of people who cannot help them, the specific patterns that appear when they think no one is watching. Schopenhauer observed this with characteristic precision. He understood that the character of a person is revealed most reliably not in what they claim about themselves, but in what they do when claiming is not required. The server at the restaurant who cannot advance their career, the worker they considered beneath their attention, the private moment captured by the small interaction they did not realize was being observed. All of these produce more accurate information about the person than any direct conversation about their values. You have been weighting the grand statements far too heavily your entire life. You have taken people's declarations about themselves at face value. You have built your assessments of the people around you on the information they have consciously provided. Information that was curated, filtered, and adjusted for your benefit. And you have consistently been surprised when their behavior in consequential moments did not match the declarations you had been accepting. The people you have misread most completely were people whose small details you failed to observe. Those details were always present. You simply were not paying attention to them because you had been trained to weight the grand statements instead. Every man has to learn this eventually. Most men learn it too late to prevent the specific damage that occurs while they are still being misled. Hidden law number 2. Most people are not thinking about you nearly as much as you assume. This is the law that protects you from one of the most persistent distortions in human psychology. The assumption that your behavior, appearance, and choices are being observed, evaluated, and remembered by other people with the same intensity that you apply to yourself. This assumption is false, almost universally false, and the false assumption has been quietly shaping your decisions your entire adult life. Marcus Aurelius understood this clearly. He returned to it repeatedly in his private writing. The specific recognition that the people around you are almost entirely absorbed in their own internal dramas, their own concerns, their own elaborate self-narratives. They do not have the psychological bandwidth to evaluate you in the detailed way you imagine. The awkward moment you have been replaying for weeks was forgotten by everyone else within minutes. The perceived judgment you felt in the room was primarily a projection of your own self-consciousness. The behaviors you have been restricting out of fear of others' evaluations were being monitored by almost no one. This is not comfort. It is information. The information has enormous practical consequences because men who assume they are being observed continuously modify their behavior to manage the observation. They forego opportunities, suppress genuine expression, and maintain the specific social rigidity that continuous imagined scrutiny produces. And they do all of this in response to an audience that does not actually exist. You have been doing this for years. The specific mental calculation about how others will perceive your choices has shaped decisions you did not need to make that way. The restriction has been extensive. The perceived observation has been largely imaginary, and the cost of operating under the false assumption has been paid in the life you did not live because you believed too many people were watching to permit you to live it. Hidden law number 3. People respond to certainty more than they respond to correctness. This is the law that most reliably offends men who believe in the primacy of truth. But the observation is accurate, whether it offends or not. In the specific social contexts where humans make most of their decisions, conversations, meetings, relationships, public exchanges, the person who expresses their position with genuine certainty receives significantly more weight than the person who expresses their position with calibrated accuracy, but visible uncertainty, even when the second person is substantially more correct. Machiavelli observed this dynamic in political operations. The leader who speaks with conviction commands allegiance even when his positions are imprecise. The leader who speaks with qualifications loses authority even when his positions are more accurate. This is not because people prefer inaccuracy. It is because the human psychological system responds to confidence signals independently of the content those signals are attached to. The confidence is processed faster than the content. The confidence shapes the reception before the content can be evaluated. You have been on the losing end of this dynamic your entire adult life. The moments when you knew you were correct, but spoke with appropriate calibration, acknowledging the limits of your certainty, honoring the complexity of the question. Were moments when you lost influence to men who were less correct, but more confident. The loss was not fair. It was also real. And the accumulation of these losses has shaped the specific position you occupy in every environment where persuasion matters. This law does not require you to abandon accuracy. It requires you to understand that accuracy and persuasion operate on different circuits, and that men who fail to recognize this continue to be outcompeted by men who do. The choice is not between integrity and manipulation. The choice is between understanding the circuits and continuing to be surprised by outcomes that the circuits reliably produce. Hidden law number 4. The things people publicly claim to value and the things they actually optimize for are almost never the same. Listen carefully to what people say they care about. Then observe, over time, what they actually organize their lives around. The gap between these two things is the most reliable data you will ever collect about a person. And for most of the people in your life, the gap is substantial. They have constructed specific public narratives about their values, narratives they may even believe about themselves. And they are simultaneously operating by different criteria that they do not consciously acknowledge. Nietzsche identified this as one of the central mechanisms of self-deception in modern life. The stated values serve a specific social function. They position the person within the moral landscape. They secure approval from the relevant reference groups. They provide a narrative identity the person can defend. The actual operating criteria serve a different function. They produce the outcomes the person is actually pursuing. And these two functions rarely overlap completely. The person who publicly values deep relationships is often optimizing for something more specific: validation, attention, social currency. The person who publicly values meaningful work is often optimizing for status, security, or the avoidance of disapproval. The person who publicly values personal growth is often optimizing for the performance of growth rather than the demanding reality of it. None of these misalignments involve conscious hypocrisy. The person genuinely believes their stated values describe them. They are simply wrong about their own operations. You have been one of these people your entire life. The gap between your stated values and your actual operating criteria is present in you too. And the specific unexamined nature of your own gap is why you have continued to be confused by the behavior of others whose gaps function exactly the same way. You have been reading their stated values when you should have been tracking their optimization patterns, and they have been returning the favor. Hidden law number 5. Envy is more common than admiration, and it disguises itself as almost anything else. This is the law that most men find hardest to accept, because accepting it requires them to recognize how consistently envy has been operating in the people around them, often people they trusted to be free of it. But the recognition is accurate. Most human responses to the success, progress, or advantages of others are some form of envy rather than genuine admiration. And envy does not usually appear as envy. It appears as criticism, as skepticism, as concern, as moral judgment, as sudden distance, as the specific subtle withdrawal of support that was previously available. Schopenhauer wrote about this with unusual directness. He understood that envy is the pre-rational response most humans experience when someone around them achieves, advances, or improves. The response is automatic. It operates beneath conscious awareness, and the person experiencing it does not usually identify the feeling as envy, because their conscious mind immediately constructs an acceptable explanation for the feeling. The successful person was just lucky, was unfair somehow, does not deserve the outcome, has changed in concerning ways. You have observed this dynamic many times. You just have not usually recognized what you were observing. The friend whose enthusiasm for your progress noticeably dimmed. The family member whose support became subtly conditional when your trajectory improved. The colleague whose behavior shifted after your promotion. Each of these was envy operating through its standard disguises. You read the disguises as their stated content: concern, distance, skepticism. Because the envy itself was not being acknowledged by the people experiencing it. The law does not require you to become cynical about human relationships. It requires you to recognize that envy is present in most of them, and that the people who do not experience it regarding your specific outcomes are significantly rarer than you have assumed. Those rare people are the ones whose responses to your progress deserve particular weight. The majority who reacted with some variant of envy were not unusual. They were standard, and you have been continuously surprised by standard human operations because you never understood the law. Hidden law number 6. People protect their self-image more aggressively than they protect anything else. This is the final law, and it explains the behavior that has most consistently confused you across your adult life. The specific irrationality that appears when you challenge someone's understanding of themselves. The disproportionate defensiveness that emerges when their self-concept is questioned. The willingness of otherwise reasonable people to damage relationships, careers, and material interests, rather than accept information that threatens their self-image. This is not personal failing. This is structural. Jung understood that the self-image is the most psychologically expensive asset a person possesses. It has been constructed over decades at enormous cost. It organizes the person's entire experience of being themselves. Threats to it are processed as existential threats, regardless of how minor the actual challenge might be. And the defensive responses these threats produce are often wildly disproportionate to the triggering event, because the defense is not really about the specific conversation. It is about the continued existence of the self-concept under attack. You have watched this dynamic operate many times. The conversation that went inexplicably wrong when you raised a reasonable question about someone's behavior. The relationship that deteriorated after you offered an observation the other person could not absorb. The career situation where your accurate feedback was treated as aggression rather than information. In each of these cases, you were unknowingly challenging someone's self-image, and their response was calibrated not to the content of your input, but to the threat level the input posed to their continued internal coherence. This law applies to you equally. You have been protecting your self-image from information that would have improved you, feedback that would have corrected you, observations that would have served you. You have done this with the same unconscious, automaticity that you have observed in others. And the cost of this protection has been the specific development that accurate information would have produced if you had been willing to receive it rather than defend against it. Most men reach the end of their lives without ever stopping this protection. They die with the self-image intact, untouched by feedback, unmodified by information, unchallenged by the specific examinations that would have required it to become something more than what it was at 30. The intact self-image is not an achievement. It is the evidence that the man never genuinely engaged with the data his life was providing. These 6 laws have been operating around you your entire adult life. They have been operating inside you for the same duration. You have been paying the specific price that men who do not understand these laws continue to pay, and you have been paying it in the only currency that matters. The years of your life that proceeded under ignorance of forces you could have been consciously navigating. Most men never learn these laws. They reach the end of their lives having been continuously surprised by dynamics that are completely predictable once understood. They call the surprises bad luck. They call the patterns misfortune. They never locate the actual source, which is the absence of the specific knowledge that would have allowed them to see what was happening. You will continue not learning these laws. You will receive this information, consider it briefly, and return to operating by the assumptions that have been producing your current outcomes. The assumptions will not be updated. The operations will not be adjusted. The specific life you are currently leading will continue unfolding according to the same rules it has been following for decades, until the end, when the cost has been fully paid, and there is no longer time to have learned anything that might have produced a different result.